Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm David Frobish, and I'm so glad to be with you today. Pastor David is in Chile visiting family, and he asked me to talk to you today about love on Valentine's Day. When we use the word love, we can mean so many different things. I love pumpkin pie. I love angel food cake. I love butterscotch brownies. I love my kids. I have 2 daughters, Lily and Vivian. I love my wife, Natalie. I love my family and friends. Some kinds of love are like that. Love is a feeling that overcomes us. We fall in love. At other times, love is not so easy. Some people are not easy to love. You may work with people or volunteer with people that are not easy to love. When this happens to me, I try to picture how they must have looked when they were a 3-year-old. Someone must have thought that they were adorable. Of course, 3-year-olds are not adorable all the time, as some of you probably know. My daughters are ages 11 and 9. I have been warned that they might become more challenging in a few years. Whatever the future holds, I know I will love them. Is this what Paul is talking about in 1 Corinthians? I think Paul is talking about a bigger concept than love as a feeling. He's talking about love in practice. Love is a verb. Love is something that you do. 1 Corinthians chapter 13 was read at my wedding. Here, actually. I'm so glad to be here on a Sunday with a Bible verse that I'm familiar with. Yet, when I think about myself and I compare it with this Bible verse, I really feel lacking. There was a man named Glenn who was a pastor in Portland. Glenn talks about how years ago he tried to learn how to carve wood. Glenn said he was not a very good student, but he remembers one piece of wisdom that Tom gave him. When they were carving a little dog, and Glenn, all frustrated, asked, "How do you do this? What's the secret of carving?" Tom looked at him thoughtfully for a moment and said, "That's easy. You pick up a piece of wood and just cut off everything that doesn't look like a dog." I like that. This is where Paul begins 1 Corinthians. He talks about what love doesn't look like. We can try to understand what needs to be cut away from us in order to allow genuine love to take root in our lives. And so Paul tells us, first, love is not envious. Frederick Buckner defines envy as the consuming desire for everyone else to be as unsuccessful as you are. And love is not boastful or arrogant. It's so exhausting to go through the day determined that others are going to be impressed by me or going to think well of me. And neither is love rude, which is to say, it's not intent upon saying or doing anything that in any way diminishes someone else. And then love doesn't insist on its own way. It isn't always me first. Love doesn't muscle its way to the head of the line, nor is love easily provoked. Real love doesn't lose its temper. And love isn't resentful. It doesn't keep score. Do you know what that's like? To have a memory of how someone has injured you and to nourish that memory? Scorekeeping kills love every time. Finally, Paul says love doesn't rejoice in wrongdoing. That is, it finds no reason to celebrate the downfall of other people. So there are some things that love is not. How did you do with this little inventory? I didn't do so well. It's hard to say these words because it's embarrassing the way they describe me personally. Do you find yourself a little embarrassed by that? I think there's probably a little bit of something on this list for everybody. So what about the things that love is? Paul says that love is patient. It never gives up. And love is kind. Love takes pleasure in what's right and true. Love bears all things, puts up with anything. And love believes all things, trusts God always. Love hopes all things. It always looks for the best. And love endures all things. It keeps going. It's a pretty tall order. How do we even hope to love that way when no one down here lives that way all the time? Are you ready for some good news? There is someone who did love like this, who does love like this. In fact, his very nature is pure love. If you take Christianity and you boil it down to the essence, you find that one thing remains. What remains is not a long set of rules or beliefs. You boil the Christian faith down to the essence, and what remains is a picture of absolute, unambiguous, undiluted love, the face of Jesus the Christ. When Jesus was here among us, he showed us another thing about love that's indispensable. Love is always something that we do. And this is what every time distinguishes love from sentimental feelings or mere good intentions. Love, in the end, is something that you do. There's a story about a woman who was an associate pastor at a Methodist church in California. The woman loved to go to Nordstrom department store in California during the Christmas season, mostly to listen to the music and just enjoy the ambiance. On one of her visits, the minister was on the top floor of the store looking at some of the finest dresses in the world. The elevator doors opened, and out stepped a very disheveled-looking woman. Her clothes were dirty and torn, her hair was matted, her stockings were rolled down to her ankles. She just stood there holding a very full and very dirty gym bag in her hand. It was obvious she probably wasn't going to buy anything. All the dresses were in the multi-thousand-dollar category. The minister half expected a security guard to come and show the woman out, but instead of a security guard, a stately saleswoman came over to the woman with the gym bag and asked, "May I help you, madam?" The woman said, "Yeah, I want to buy a dress." "Any particular kind of dress?" The saleswoman asked in a very kind and dignified manner. "A party dress," the woman answered. "Well, you've come to the right place," said the saleswoman. "Follow me. I think we have some of the finest party dresses in the world." The saleswoman then spent more than 15 minutes matching the dresses with the woman's skin color and eye color, trying to help her find just the right match. After selecting 3 dresses, the saleswoman said, "Shall we go and try them on?" They headed to the dressing room. The minister hurried into the adjoining dressing room and put her ear up to the wall. She had to hear what would happen next. The woman with the gym bag tried on the dresses with the saleswoman's help. But then after about 10 minutes, she said abruptly, "I've changed my mind. I'm not going to buy a dress today." The minister in the adjoining cubicle held her breath and heard the saleswoman say, "That's all right." And then in a gentle voice, she said, "But here's my card. Should you come back to Nordstrom, I do hope you'll ask for me. I would consider it such a privilege to wait on you again." And don't you just get the feeling that that's exactly what Jesus would do if Jesus were a saleswoman at Nordstrom? That woman knew that love is something you do. Wouldn't it be wonderful to be known by that kind of love? In the end, love is one thing that will make us recognizable in the world as a people who follow Christ and as those who are walking in his way. The love of which he speaks is not something that you're swept up in emotionally. It's something you decide and do. And it's certainly not a love that grants continual bliss or peace of mind. For example, it is patient, he says, and God knows. Being patient can be painful, can it not? And it does not insist on its own way in life, and that's often hard to handle, to accept. And it is a love that bears and endures. That doesn't sound like a Hallmark call at all. The reality is, we give ourselves fully to love only by setting aside our absorption in our own feelings, our longings for eternal happiness, our desire for ongoing bliss. I want to read a story that Mark Hardin of the Columbus Dispatch wrote some years ago. It illustrates beautifully the kind of love that Paul is speaking of. It's the story of Mary Stager and Frank Stager as Frank was dying. When Frank Stager pushed himself into an upright position in the hospital bed, the heart monitor's fluid cursive line disintegrated into an erratic scribble. "I told the doctor," he said, peeking at the edge of the curtain to make sure his wife, Mary, was not within earshot. "I told him I felt like I was drowning." He said, "This is what happens when you have congestive heart failure." I told him I'd rather be thrown off the roof instead. Mary returned to the room, drawing a chair close to his bedside. "Thirsty," he complained. She lifted the straw to his lips as he pulled the oxygen mask aside. The medicine made him sick then. She fetched the basin, wrapped a firm arm around his spasm-racked shoulders, mopped the sweat from his forehead. In sickness and in health. They were supposed to be preparing for a Florida vacation, not holding on to each other in a cardiac care unit. "Help me sit up," he whispered hoarsely. In the end, love comes down to this. Not Clark Gable's devilish first appraisal of Vivian Lee, not Burt Lancaster and Deborah Kerr rolling in the surf, but help me sit up. A sharp-toothed rain spattered against the window pane. In the room, a procession of medical courtiers came and went, trading pills for blood and tinkering, ever tinkering, with the buttons and dials controlling the tubes and wires to which their patient was trussed, like some latter-day Gulliver. One evening, Frank was sitting asleep in the chair next to the bed. Mary paused in the waiting room to remove her street shoes and put on her slippers. She did not want to wake him now that sleep was such a ration luxury. Soundlessly, she slipped into the chair next to his. In the end, Love is not the smoldering glance across the dance floor, the clink of crystal, a leisurely picnic spread upon summer's clover. It is the squeeze of a hand. I'm here. I'll be here, no matter how long the fight. Even when you want most to close your eyes and be done with it all. Water? You need water? Here. Drink. Let me straighten your pillow. Help me in the bed, he said. He who had once been a warrior triumphant in the business world, he was tough, demanding, but never as much on others as himself. If you gave him your best, no one could hurt you. If you gave him less, no one could hide you. She had been with him and beside him when the future was golden, beside him when his health sent his career into eclipse. I'm thirsty, he said. Here, she said, let me get you something. Along the road they once traveled so often to visit family, the hearse wound its way past stubbled fields, shattered roadside markets. The minister, clutching his Bible against his chest as though it were a sufficient cloak against the winds whipping across the rural countryside. Past the final benediction, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. He stooped up to pick up his hat as the funeral director placed the folded flag in Mary's lap. So when all is said and done, love is not rapture and fire. It's a hand steadier than one's own, squeezing harder than a heartbeat. Wine changes back into water. Endearment is exhibited by what once might have been considered insignificant kindness, but which in the end became the tenderest administrations. On the day after the funeral, trying to busy herself with chores that could easily wait, she plopped the laundry basket down in front of her granddaughter. The child tugged on the end of the sheet as Frank had once held when they did the wash. When the child brought the folded end to meet the corners that her grandmother held, she kissed her playfully, just as he had once done. I'm thirsty, Grandma. Here, let me get you something. A beautiful picture of what life is all about, is it not? But there are only two questions we need to ask. Through all of this, was she blissfully happy, untroubled, content? I very much doubt it. Through all of this, was her life deeply meaningful, full of importance and purpose? I certainly think so. Lent in 2016 can be our time of reconciliation, to realize that we cannot succeed on our own, and to recommit ourselves to following Christ, and to love one another as Christ loves us. Is this possible? I told Pastor David that I wanted to feel hopeful. I want to feel like I can act in a more loving way. What if you replace the word love in 1 Corinthians with your own name? As I say this, try to hear it with your own name. David is patient. David is kind. David does not envy. David does not boast. David is not proud. David is not rude. David is not self-seeking. David is not easily angered. David keeps no record of wrong. David does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. David always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. David never fails. I thank God that I don't depend upon myself. I depend on God. The Bible has words of encouragement to help us to have faith. In Philippians chapter 4, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. On Valentine's Day, it's important to remember that our human experience and our purpose on earth, it's all about love. In John chapter 13, Jesus says, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." What would happen if we took these words to heart? If we recommitted ourselves to Christ and we put love into practice? It would change our world. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we fall short of Christ's example. Grant us your strength to love you and to love one another, to fulfill your will, so that others will want to know you because they've seen us put love into practice.